Well, thank you very much for inviting me to present some results of the MAFE project today. And actually, I must say I'm very happy to be here to present these results because this project, the MAFE project, started here 10 years ago when I came as a visiting fellow to study how the NMP that all of you know quite well could be adapted to the African context. Then I went back to France. I started this project, and I'm very happy to be here to present some of these results. MAFE means migration between Africa and Europe, and we say MAFE and not MAF or MAFE because it's a pun. Actually, MAFE is a famous dish in West Africa, so remind you must say MAFE. And the important thing also to remind about the title of the project is that the most important word is between, migration between Africa and Europe, because the primary intention was to work on migration between Africa and Europe, on relationships between Africa and Europe through migrants, and not only on migration from Africa to Europe. And my talk today is about this relationship between Africa and Europe, because I'm going to talk about transnational families, and especially on couples who live apart together across borders. This is a clear reference to living apart together couples, which is a quite known concept to describe couples in Western countries, and that we adapted to international migrants who live apart across borders. And what's important, I think, in this talk is to show how significant this family situation is to live apart across borders, and also to understand how it happens, and to show that it does not only happen because of state regulation in destination countries, but also for reasons that relate to the context in the origin countries. So my talk will follow a very classical outline. I present the framework, the data, results, and finally I will conclude. So the primary motivation for this work, I forgot to mention that this is a very collective work, of course, and then our primary motivation was and is still the growing, the context of growing restrictions in Europe against family reunification since the 90s in all countries in Europe. States started to make their policies regarding family reunification more and more restrictive, and African families, Sub-Saharan families in this context, are especially targeted in public discourses. They are very stigmatized. There is a fear of invasion, and that there is this idea that in the public debates and in the discourses of policymakers, that all African migrants will reunify, that this is a universal aspiration. And there is also this belief that reunified migrants are insufficiently selected, and that they are basically they are described as unwanted. And this is the President Sarkozy, when he was president, opposed migration subie, that you could translate into maybe unwanted migration, to talk about family reunification, against migration choisie, which is selected migration. So it was a clear public expression that family reunification is unwanted in Europe. And the objective of this paper was to question this common assumption that family reunification is not a self-selective process, this common assumption that all migrants, all African migrants would reunify, would want to reunify. And our idea was that this view is the result of a double bias, Eurocentric bias, I would say. A first bias related to methodology, which is that most data available on reunification are official data. States count the people who actually reunify, but they have no information on those who do not reunify. And since most countries in Europe stopped labor migration in the mid-70s, then by construction, family reunification is important in the measure of the flows. And the fact that some migrants do not reunify is just invisible in statistics. The second bias is more ideological, or let's say conceptual, and it relates to the view of the family and the fact that in the Western context we see families as a nuclear family with the parents and the children living all together. And even though this model has been challenged, for instance, by living apart together couples, this model does not really apply in all countries, and certainly not in the African context. And this is something I'm going to enter further in a few minutes. So the way we frame this notion of family reunification is that we consider it's a multi-level selection act, which results from self-selection, the self referring to the couples, having in mind that there might be some divergences within the couples, of course, and the idea is that this selection at the couple level is under the strong influence of the social context at origin. And when I'm talking about social context, I refer to gender and family norms, and again, I'm going to come back on this later. And the second level of selection is state selection at destination through immigration policies, since the states are those who are able to decide who can reunify and under what conditions. And now I'm going to enter into more details about state selection and then self-selection. So about state selection, the basic selection criteria in Europe, each state, even though there is the European Union, each state is still responsible of its immigration policy, and basically all states have criteria on the matrimonial status, the fact that people have to be married, for instance, to be eligible. They relate on socioeconomic status, housing conditions, migrants' earnings, and so on. Partner language skills is a criteria that has been introduced in some countries, but after the period observed in this paper. And since the immigration policy is not integrated in Europe, there are variations across countries and over time. And this is exemplified on this map that comes from the MIPEX project. And this map shows the MIPEX index for family reunification in 2007. And you can see that the dark blue show the critically unfavorable countries, which are not represented on this map, and the lightest pink is show favorable countries towards family reunion. And what you can see is that most countries in Europe are in the middle, because they are democracies and they can not just cut family reunification, which is a right, an international right, but some are more restrictive and other more open to family reunification. And here, with the minus sign, you can see those countries involved in our analysis that are considered as restrictive countries according to the MIPEX. So these are France, the Netherlands, and the UK, and more permissive countries, let's say, that are Spain, Italy, and Belgium. So the question for us here is, do restrictive policies actually reduce reunification? And to our knowledge, there is so far no quantitative evidence so far. There is a big debate in the literature on migration control and in general, not only on family reunification, showing in a logic thing that restrictions are inefficient, that they have an intended effect, basically because there's substitution effect with migrants able to use other channels of entry when one channel is closed. And there is evidence of de facto reunification, and what we call de facto reunification is reunification that happens not using the legal channel of reunification. So a couple that reunifies, in fact, but not with a left behind partner entering with a permit for reunification, entering, for instance, for studies or work or and this qualitative evidence of de facto reunification show that migrants can use other legal channels of entry, as I mentioned, and also can reunify on, as says Comparative on the fringes of the law. I mean, they couples may reunify illegally, with the left behind coming in Europe illegally. Self-selection now, so that there is some evidence of non-reunification in the literature, but the quantitative evidence is quite scarce. But there are some evidence, however, that some couples and sometimes quite significantly live apart together across borders. And the economic rationale for living apart together across borders refers to earning maximization, the idea of risk sharing and mutual insurance, and it has to be balanced with the emotional cost of living, of being separated. And precisely this cost in this Sub-Saharan African context must be let's say qualified, because couples are qualified by Finlay as couples of low consistency. First, it's a very general statement. Of course, Africa is big, and there are a lot of nuances within Africa, but there are some strong features. The fact that families are quite extended with a strong influence of the elders, with lineage solidarity being more important than couple solidarity, and also there is some distance between partners, emotional distance, because of the way people are made together. Spouse choice is not only a personal matter. There is quite often an important age gap between the partners, with the man being older usually. In some countries there is polygamy, and of course all these elements help to live apart together. And indeed, within Africa, living apart together is actually very common. And Notestein, who is a Congolese demographer, talks about ubiquitous families to describe these families who live separately in different places. Also, the idea that family reunification does not systematically alters, and that it is not a universal aspiration of Sub-Saharan migrants, comes from the fact that there are social forces at origin against reunification. For instance, due to intergenerational relationships, for instance, it's not rare that left behinds are left under the control of the in-laws, and they have interest to keep the left behind with them because they represent a labor force, and also because they represent an insurance that remittances will continue to arrive. And there are also gender norms and role expectations in the origin countries in Sub-Saharan Africa that are against female migration, because a good wife is not expected to migrate, and also the idea that migration to Europe especially would expose women to more egalitarian norms, possibly conducing to divorce and so on, and this threat to social order is clearly expressed in qualitative works. Then the question of women aspiration in this context, and okay, the question is how they can gain more autonomy by moving, reunifying their partner abroad in Europe especially, or staying behind. And the idea here, coming from the literature, is that those who are more educated are more likely to reunify, because they gain a greater benefit in terms of gender relationships. They have higher incentives, because there are those who suffer the most from discrimination on the labor market at origin, and there are also those who have the higher employment prospects at destination, and also those who are supposed to have the greater agency to convince their family and husband to let them migrate. I described the family context as a whole for Sub-Saharan Africa, and as I mentioned, obviously, Africa is diverse. And here I come into the three cases we're studying in this paper, which are the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ghana, and Senegal. And there are some indicators coming from the MAFE surveys. The proportion of living apart together couples, the proportion of men who are polygamous, and the proportion of women in consensual unions. And you can see that Senegal is characterized by a very high level of living apart together couples within the country. You can see also there that polygamy is very high, at least compared to other countries, and reversely that the proportion of women in consensual union is very small compared to the other countries. Sorry. So this Senegal exemplified the most patriarchal context in our three cases. And DR Congo and Ghana are less patriarchal, and Congo is also characterized by the fact that in the 90s there was a terrible civil war, and it has an incidence, of course, on migration patterns. And well, our idea here is that reunification is certainly more likely in the less patriarchal contexts. So I'm coming to the hypothesis to sum up everything I told. The first is that living apart together across borders is a common and long-lasting arrangement with a propensity that varies with the context at origin. As I mentioned, we expect more reunification in more gender egalitarian societies, which means more from Congo and Ghana than from Senegal. And we also expect more reunification in times of trouble at origin, referring to the Congolese context. The second hypothesis is that the propensity to reunify will not vary according to the level of restrictiveness in destination countries, and it's grounded in the fact that a lot of studies have shown that policies in matter of immigration control are not really efficient, because migrants have some agency to control them. Third hypothesis, still we do believe that the individuals, the couples who comply with the official selection criteria are more likely to regroup, both because of state selection and also because of self-selection, because people who are, the migrants who are the more wealthy know by themselves that they are those who are the more able to have their family with them at destination, for instance. And the fourth hypothesis refers to the fact that more educated women, are more likely to regroup, as I just explained, and this refers to self-selection, since education of women is not at all an official selection criteria for reunification. Okay, some words about the data and method. So as I said, the method project is pretty much inspired by the MMP project, even though the methodology differs in many ways, but still the idea of multi-sited survey with data collected at origin and data collected in destination countries is here. You can see that we selected 3 African countries for the project with very different backgrounds in ecological, policy, colonial history terms. And for each origin countries, we have at least 2 destination countries, one being the former colonial metropolis. We have the samples in Africa and in Europe, and in Africa we focused only on the region surrounding the capital city, except in Ghana where we also did the survey in Kumasi. In Africa we have random samples, and you can see the numbers of questionnaires we collected, so we have household and individual questionnaires. And in Europe, the samples are expected to be representative at the national level. And I insist on the fact that they are representative as far as possible, and basically they are not representative. And it's just not possible to have representative samples, except in Spain, where there is the Padrón, which is a register in which the undocumented migrants do register. And we use the Padrón in Spain. But in other countries, we used a combination of different selection methods to try to that each that the bias associated to each method is cancelled by the bias of the other method. So it's not really satisfying, but this is the best we could do. And you have here the number of migrants we surveyed in Europe. Okay, we have comparable data. So we have in the math project multi-level databases, in the sense that we have individual data collected at the individual level, household data collected only in Africa, And we also have contextual databases on policies and more generally on all sort of national level indicators. Most of the information is of retrospective retrospective nature. We have full life histories in the individual survey, in the individual questionnaire. We have some retrospective information in the household questionnaire, and the contextual databases are series. And importantly, the questionnaires are absolutely identical in all countries, or not absolutely because there are some minor exceptions, but for instance related to religion or ethnic groups, which are very cultural specific variables. For the rest, the data files have exactly the same variables and structures. And we had a lot of, we worked a lot to standardize in advance the concepts and self-translation issues that could arise using this data, using the questionnaires on so different contexts. And the data are available, so please use them. Okay, I'm coming back now more on the analysis of this paper. So we work on LATAM couples, living apart together, cross-border couples. These are males in Europe and females in Africa. When I say Europe and Africa, of course, I refer only to the MAFI countries. The couples may be married or not. The unions possibly started after migration, because some migrants move and then go back and then marry and then go back in Europe. So, and data were arranged as couple year 5, and you have here the number of observation of couple years observations. So here it's a life history example. So you have someone who was born in 73. He was age 0 at this year, and here in 2003 he married Fatima, and here you have the countries where he lived since he was born, and he was in Senegal, then moved in 99 to France, then to Spain, and he stayed there. And his partner Fatima was in Senegal from the time of the union started, and she moved to Spain in 2006. And we have all sorts of variables describing mostly the interviewee, but also his or her partner. So here is the period when we start our observation. We start to observe couples once they form a couple, and once they are living apart together across borders. So here you can see that the interviewee is in Spain while his partner is in Senegal. So, yeah. So these are the years that are observed, and we follow them until reunification or until censoring, which might be the time of the survey, or which might be divorce, or which might be the fact that the migrant returns to Senegal, Congo, or Ghana, which is considered as a case of censorship. Okay, we used even history analysis techniques. Kaplan-Meier estimates to estimate the time to reunification, and then large discrete time models to study the factors of reunification. The dependent variable is reunification in Europe, in one of the MAFI countries. And we look at overall reunification, which is legal reunification, those people who enter with a permit referring to officially to reunification, or couples who reunify just by any other mean, which is de facto reunification. And we have no mean to distinguish this. We have no data to distinguish those who enter legally or de facto. I just mentioned the different types of censoring, and the independent variables refer to the context of destination, cross-destination and period, conditions of migration, legal status, whether the migrant visits home. We have many variables referring to the couple situations, years living apart together, whether they're married, whether they started the couple at distance, whether they are polygamous, the number of children, and socioeconomic characteristics, referring both to the migrant and to the woman. And we have one model for each origin. So results. Time to reunification first. What you can see here is the proportion of living apart together cross-borders couples, and here you have the number of years since they are separated. and at time 0, all of them are separated, since we stop the observation at this moment. And you can see that 10 years after separation, more than 80% of the Senegalese couples are still separated, the proportion being 75 for the Ghanaian couples and 63 for the Congolese couples, which shows that living apart together across borders is very common, because the proportion is quite high after 10 years, and it's also a very long-lasting situation. And also what these results show is that indeed reunification is less frequent in more gender egalitarian contexts, and also in context of political turmoil, which is...
Are those continuous? That is, during that 10-year period, let's say for the Ghanaians, that means that they make no trip back to Ghana to see their spouse if they're living apart together, or is that they're still planning to come back to their country of destination?
Thank you for the question. It refers on how couples are defined. What we know, we ask, when did you start your relationship, your partnership?
Right.
And they end.
I see. So they're still together.
They declare they form a couple, which says nothing about the consistency of the couple. We do not know whether to what extent they meet, whether they continue to have children in the meantime, whether the man sends money back in Africa, and so on, which is something that should be explored now, I think. But still, they declare they still form a couple. That's their declaration. Yeah, I'm going on. Time to reunification again, but here we distinguish between the different destination countries. So each graph is for a specific origin. And for Ghanaian couples, I won't comment very much because there is no big difference in the restrictiveness of policies in the destination countries, UK and the Netherlands. So here, when I talk about restrictiveness, I refer to the map I showed before. This is a very crude estimate. It was measured in 2007. But to our knowledge, there is no better indicator. There is no time-varying indicator to tell whether countries are more or less restrictive. So we use this MIPEX indicator. For Ghanaian couples, no difference. For Congolese and Senegalese couples, we have countries that are different in terms of restrictiveness. If you look at Congolese couples, for instance, Belgium in pink is less restrictive than the United Kingdom. So blue lines refer to restrictive countries. And so for Congolese couples, you can see that the more restrictive country is the one in which reunification is the more common, which is not what is politically expected. And we can see the same thing for Senegalese couples, where we compare France, which is the more restrictive, to Spain and Italy, who are less restrictive. So the question is, how come countries who are more restrictive are those where reunification is more likely? And the explanation may vary a bit according to the original consider. For Congolese couples, it certainly refers to the fact that most to different profiles. Most Congolese in the United Kingdom are asylum seekers or refugees, and as such, they have more facilities to regroup. And this is probably the main explanation. For Senegalese couples, I think it refers to policies, but more to labor migration policies. Until the mid-70s in France, Senegalese migration was already very common, and then France decided to stop labor migration. Before this period, Senegalese migrants were known to be, they are characterized in the literature as trans-migrants, meaning they were constantly coming and going, leaving the family behind, and having no idea of reunification. And this was really organized this way. And then France stopped labor migration, and at the same time opened the possibility for reunification. And of course, migrants started to settle because they had no more this possibility of comings and goings. and they started to settle, and to some extent, and lately comparing to other groups, to some extent to regroup. Yeah, and these results are confirmed. The effect of period and the effect of countries is confirmed in the models results, but I don't show this variable. I'm coming to the models results, going into the more individual or couple related variables, and I'm going to describe different blocks of variables, starting with the variables on the couple's characteristics. Then what you can see here is that the variables related to the matrimonial situation go in the expected sense. Those who are married, those who are married are more likely to reunify, which is in line with official criteria. Those who are polygamous are have very low chances of reunification, which is also in line with official criteria, but which could also refer to self-selection, because people who are polygamous have no interest to reunify in context where they are super stigmatized and where the social context is not at all suited to live in a polygamy family. And you can see that these results on the couple situation are very significant for Ghanaian and Senegalese couples, but not for Congolese couples, which probably can be explained by the fact that there is more de facto reunification among Congolese couples, and which also reflect the context of crisis in Congo. In the context of severe crisis, migration become much less selective, and this is what is reflected here. And you can see also for Congo that the fact that the union started at a distance augments significantly the fact of reunification, and we interpret this as a kind of migration strategy, starting a union, entering into a marriage to be able to migrate, because that's the context of origin is terrible, and then any name is good to migrate. Migration conditions now. Obviously, you can see that having a stay permit augments significantly the chances to regroup. And you can find here a character that this variable about visits, so it's short visits to the country of origin. It's just for Senegalese. It really refers to this profile of transmigrants. These migrants still going and coming when they come and leave their family behind. Part of the socioeconomic characteristics. Here you have the characteristics referring to the socioeconomic of the male migrants at destination, and you can see, as expected, that those who are skilled and professional, so the higher socioeconomic status, are those who are the more likely to regroup, which again refers to official criteria of selection, but also to self-selection. As I said, people who are wealthier are more likely to be able to have their family with them in Europe, where life is much more expensive than in African countries. And here you have the results about the left behind, the female left behind level of education, and you can see indeed that the more educated women are more likely to regroup, which reflects only self-selection and at the couple level, because it's not at all an official criteria, and it's especially true in the context of Senegalese migration, which is the context with characterized with a very high level of patriarchality, and it's a country which is characterized, as I showed before, by quite social norms with the low where gender relationships are not very egalitarian compared to other countries. So it's especially strong, the effect for Senegalese couples. It remains for Ghanaian couples, but it does not exist again for Congolese migration, and it's again probably related to the fact that the context of crisis makes migration much less selective. Okay. Now I'm coming to the conclusions, back to the hypothesis. So, as expected, living apart together across borders appears as a very common and long-lasting arrangement situation, family situation. It largely depends on the social context at origin. Reunification, it was the first hypothesis, reunification is much more frequent in more gender egalitarian societies, and women education is much more influential in patriarchal context, which was the fourth hypothesis. And so we have here signs of self-selection, but under the influence of the origin social context. And what about the state selection effect? Well, against policy expectation, we have shown that reunification is not less frequent where policies are more restrictive. And we, however, saw that individuals who comply with official selection criteria are more likely to regroup, but it may reflect both, as I mentioned before, state selection and self-selection. That there is some idea that there is sort of convergence between the selection process of the couples and the state. So there is evidence of both state and self-selection. The context at origin matters, as I said, with social norms at origin shaping reunification patterns. Also the context in terms of, let's say, political or military context also matters, and we see that migrants' agency is especially salient in the context of civil crisis, with this idea, for instance, that people may have migration strategies to use reunification to be able to migrate and to marry in order to be able to migrate. Well, I think that, coming to the conceptual and methodological insights, I think that these papers show that a multi-sided approach is really important to give a proper account of family reunification. Clearly, having just data in destination countries, counting only those who enter, and having no account of those who live apart together. So having only monosided data is not at all sufficient to have a clear account of family reunification. Extending the notion of living apart together to living apart together across borders is also, I think, useful to reverse the view on family reunification and to reverse the idea that it's a universal thing that all migrants want and will do. However, there are some limitations and some further work which is needed. There is clearly a need to better disentangle state and self-selection. That is, it's complicated to see what relates to what people want and how they integrate the norms that states want to fix. We have also, I mentioned before, a very rough measure of reunification policies. And it should be studied further, because I mean the result is quite exciting, but still it's a bit weak. Also, we have no insights here on the couple bargain. We define self-selection at the couple level, but we don't know really what happens within the couple, and for sure partners do not have the same interests. And finally, it refers to your question before. We don't know how consistent these couples are. The people say they are in couple, but what does it mean at 10 years, after 10 years of separation? So this could be explored because we have data, as I mentioned, on visits. We have data on remittances. We know whether they have children and so on. So it could be explored, but the idea came after this paper. So this is something to do now. If you want to do it, welcome. Thank you.